there's been a lot of buzz about vegan and how we need as Planet Reality to become more active in promoting veganism. So with the upcoming dinner this Saturday night that I hope I'll see everyone at, I think is a great lead-in to that. And Mike is the president of aPlantBasedDiet.org, a nonprofit that runs the local Veg Fest. The Veg Fest, which is coming up next Sunday, so we have a double event this weekend. And VeganDC.org, the taste group, and promoting education and a lot of information about veganism. And he's particularly interested in food as medicine, though tonight he's going to talk about the choices and how they affect our climate. Local boy from Montgomery County. And have I said anything else? Take it away.
Okay. All right, thanks. Well, yeah, as she mentioned, I'm the president of aPlantBasedDiet.org, which is in the middle of this little pull-up banner, and also VeganDC.org, which is a group, like you said. There's got about 1,200 members, I think, in that group right now. Really, we talk about anything involving veganism that's local, and we have a sign-up sheet here too, which will, if you sign up, will tell you about vegan-related events that are going on in the DC area. That's basically it. And then tonight, like we talked about, you're obviously a climate and environmental group, so there's 3 parts to veganism, as many of you probably know, and our slogan actually for most of our events is called "For People, Animals, and Our Planet." So we'll be talking about our planet tonight. So first thing I want to find out as the audience, is I'm just meeting all of you really for the first time. I may have communicated with some of you beforehand. How many people here are vegan? By show of hands. Okay, and then everyone else, anyone vegetarian? And anyone just concerned about, I don't know, the environmental impacts of what you're eating? Anybody else?
Yes.
So everybody will be interested in what I have to say. And so typically maybe a third of the people here are vegan already, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 2/5. So that's good. You may know some of these things already, but what I want to do is just start off with a quick movie. So let me get this thing, it's already queued up. I just want to get it started. It's only about 5 minutes in length. And hopefully the volume is good. I was testing this out before I got here. Let's give a good overview.
The word champion has come as a cure-all for the world's environmental, ethical, and health issues. And critiqued by others who see it as a narrow-viewed approach to the food systems. It has quickly moved into the spotlight as a contentious issue across a broad range of communities. Even so, variations on vegan diets, such as Meatless Mondays, have become more widespread as the negative impact of the way we raise livestock has become clear. With vegan eaters, we as underwriting activists, and those that subscribe to a diet that's heartless and unethical. It's important to understand where veganism is going and how we can live the ideological gap between these groups. The product in all of this is the issue of climate. So, talking about veganism, we need to debate whether or not veganism
I had the same problem when I showed a video here too. Just pause it and just go into adjust and see if there's a way to fix that. It plays the background music in the front and puts the voice in the back.
I see what you're saying, yeah. I don't know, Bruce, but it's okay. I tried the other one. The other one actually sounded better. Maybe I just do that one instead. We don't have to watch both of them. And the other one's much louder too, I noticed that.
Or you can just have it play from your computer. We'll all listen to it.
Yeah. Let's try this thing. It does the same thing. You don't have to watch both.
By 2050, the world's population can approach 10 billion. It's around 60%.
Let's do that again. Same thing. Same thing. Okay. Yeah, it's not going to work. Well, that's okay. I can talk about a few other things. It basically was talking about some general statistics about veganism.
Oh, it looks like, is that closed caption on the bottom right-hand corner? Is there a way to do?
That's one way to do it, sure.
Would that work?
Yeah, we can read it. That's great.
We'll try that. We'll go back to the first one. That's
Uh-huh.
that one is Portuguese. Oh, there, quick study. Subtitles. Let's try it. English. There we go.
English, oh, English, that's even better.
Portuguese is rusty.
We'll try this again.
Nowadays become more widespread as the negative impact of the way we raise livestock. Veganism has as underlying activists know that subscribe to a diet as part of the understand where veganism is going, how we bridge the ideological gap between these groups. And caught up in all of this is the issue of climate change. So, talking about veganism, we need to debate whether or not veganism is truly Eaters are drawn to veganism or a herbivorous diet void of any animal products for a number of reasons. Among them are cruelty towards animals and health benefits. But today, I'm going to solely focus on the environmental effects of veganism as a driver for eating plant-based foods. In terms of environmentalism and climate adaptation, veganism is effective in lowering one's personal carbon footprint. Part of the reason for this is the large amount of emissions produced by the meat industry. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, livestock emissions account for 14.5% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. A majority of these emissions come from ruminants like cows, who often require more feed, produce more waste, and need higher amounts of energy input than smaller animals like chickens. In addition, the meat industry has led to deforestation in the name of more land to raise cattle. And as a result, this has led to a decrease in the Earth's capacity to capture and sequester carbon. Despite the high impact of meat production on the environment, however, this has not been embraced by all. Strictly from an environmental standpoint, some argue that veganism is not appropriate in some parts of the world because it fails to use the available land efficiently. And Peter's et al.'s study in the Environmentalism journal, for example, they reveal that a strict plant-based diet will feed less people than other diets like a dairy-friendly vegetarian diet in the United States because it would fail to make use of perennial grasslands that we use for grazing. Perhaps even more importantly, being vegan is not a possibility for everyone. For the 23.5 million people living in food deserts and a wide variety of plant-based proteins are simply not available. For low-income people, buying specialty vegan products is often not an option. For some people of color, food traditions, including those that involve meat, are an important connection with heritage and a means of resisting assimilation and oppression. Despite these challenges of maintaining a fully vegan diet, veganism is not framed as an algorithm or an aspirational diet, but as an identity. We don't do vegan, we are vegan. This means that any consumption of animal products relegates people to a non-vegan status, which tends to push many from any kind of vegan movement and deters others from attempting a vegan diet. As the Vice President of the Humane Society Farm Animal Welfare Department points out, getting people to eat less meat may be easier than getting people to eat no meat. And you could probably spare more animals doing that. From an environmental standpoint, this means eating less meat in places like feedlots and instead investing in the occasional meal of meat raised from ranchers and employ practices like restorative grazing, which, by mimicking the grazing patterns of other large grass eaters like buffalo, are helping to restore perennial grasslands globally, ultimately returning the ability for grasslands to capture carbon by healing the land and the soil. But this also means understanding what is appropriate for your local food system. For some, there are just too many barriers in place to follow a strict plant-based diet. In terms of the environment, putting vegan doesn't necessarily have to mean giving up meat for the rest of your life. That could be a reality for a few.
Okay, what you got out of that movie, hopefully, or the old clip, is that I don't think there's any dispute as to whether or not going vegan is going to help the environment. It is. The only thing that someone brought up in that clip is that it won't make most effective use of natural grasslands. You know, not to say that you can't necessarily plant plants on there if you need to, but we'll get into that. You probably don't even need to. But that was the only maybe negative side of veganism, I suppose, if there even is one. But if you have native animals out there grazing on their own, I think that would take care of it. You wouldn't even worry about that aspect. But this chart right here will basically explain to you why veganism is so effective in, you know, helping the environment. Because if you look at this chart, I just actually got this today, it talks about, up here is between 0 and 100, the contribution of farm animal products to each category. So if you look at the total 100% of all of our food, only 18% of all calories that humans consume are attributable to animal products. All right, but if you, and then if you go to protein, it's up to 37, because usually those are very protein-heavy foods, but still, because of the fact that it takes 83% of the land, okay, that is being, the farmland, to raise 18% of the calories, that's where you see the disconnect. If you haven't been made aware of that before, it's a huge disconnect. It's not efficient. If you're talking about trying to feed a large amount of people, it's the least efficient way to go. And in addition to that, here you see greenhouse gas emissions. Well, that's basically from cows and livestock farting. A lot of that is that, but it's other things too. Water pollution, air pollution. It's a huge percentage of all farmland, you know, is attributable to animal agriculture. And talk about water pollution, for instance. If you think about it, one of the reasons why animal agriculture is so inefficient is because it takes so much food to feed these animals. And these animals are almost exclusively eating plants. Plants that humans could just eat directly instead of going through a middleman, basically, which is what the animal is. And of course, when you do that, you're raising all these extra crops that you don't need. We probably have almost certainly way more crops than we need to feed the entire planet. The problem is that such a huge percentage of them are going to the animals to feed those animals. But because we're also overproducing crops for the animals, most of these crops are not organic. So you're throwing down chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. That's a major, major problem. Okay, so you can see that if you're growing food in improper ways and then at a high magnitude of waste, I say, inefficiencies going to the animals, it's gonna hurt our environment unnecessarily. Another thing to think about with animal agriculture involving water pollution is the fact that, you know, whenever you have a large group of humans together, you usually will have like a public sewer system to control all the wastes. But on any of these farms, that's non-existent. No one's required to do that. I don't think anyone does. If you know of anyone that does that, please let me know, because usually it just runs off straight into the waterways, or they collect some of it, they spray it all over the fields, actually is what they do. They grow other crops and things, but it's a very non-environmentally friendly way to handle things. And in addition to that, typically where they have large livestock operations are typically they're seeing land efficiency is one of the things we talked about in this video. Well, animal agriculture is very efficient from a land use standpoint, because someone will come back and argue and say, well, these animals are being used on land that would not be able to be used for anything else. Typically they're in floodplains, wetland areas, and you know, from an environmental standpoint, you cannot build on a floodplain or a wetland area, but you can throw all your livestock in there. So the problem is that magnifies, it ramps up the environmental disaster that livestock is, because when all this waste comes out, it's going right into the waterways. There's probably no buffer there. They're in the buffer in a lot of cases. So these are things that you don't hear talked about a lot, but if you think about this, because I know you're all environmentalists, we're trying to frame this in an environmental standpoint, you'd think that this is probably the worst way someone can handle something environmental, and it is. And that's why these numbers are so high. Let me also give you one more graphic. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I've got to do this. All right, now this explains the differences in animal and agricultural products and how they differ in efficiency. And I don't have to go into a long explanation of this chart, but I'll give you a very simple explanation, which is this is the plant side, this is the animal product side. There's different animal products here. Beef is the least efficient animal product there is. So in order to get let's say in this instance, protein, 4 grams of protein. Well, beef is horribly inefficient. So you would get 100 grams of plant protein for every 4 grams of beef protein. This takes into consideration all the different factors that we just talked about. Pork is next less efficient. You get 10 grams of protein for the same amount of resources and energy of protein in plants. And then it goes down. Dairy is also incredibly inefficient. 25 grams of protein versus 100. Poultry is more efficient. You can see 50 versus 50, although poultry has other issues. If you ever read consumer reports, you'll read that 98% of all chicken samples ever tested have harmful bacteria, so you can look that up your own. It's something different to talk about. But eggs is a little bit more efficient as well, but still extremely inefficient when you're talking about getting 60 grams of protein versus 100 on the plants. So this, again, I'm trying to frame this in an environmental perspective because all these things require resources and energy to grow, and they all have their side effects. You know, if you're growing organic plants, you're going to have the least amount of side effects, and actually, in my opinion, a net positive when you're growing plants organically in the right way. Positive for the environment. Whereas the animal products are all negative. The only question is how negative is it, and this chart tells you the worst. So if you want to start trying to be better environmentally with your diet, get rid of beef, get rid of pork, get rid of dairy for sure. The other ones you can maybe take a little bit more time with, but those are really, really bad. So let me get into the next video. I've got another like 5-minute video clip to show you. All right, I'm with the closed captions on. There they are. Okay, they're on.
By 2050, the world's population had approached 10 billion. And around 60% of our food we need to feed. Analysing an imagined scenario in which the world goes vegan by 2050.
If everybody went vegan by 2050, we estimated that the food-related greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by 3/4.
Cows are the biggest emission contributors. Bugs in their digestive system produce methane, and deforestation of their pasture releases carbon dioxide. These gases all the planet. If cows were a country, they'd be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter. dairy with less calories could save lives.
If the world went vegan in 2050, we estimated that premature mortality and also all-cause mortality could be reduced by about 20%.
Which could make the global economy healthier too.
We know how much money is used to treat certain diseases that are associated with that. So heart disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes. Then we get to an estimate about $1 trillion US dollars in 2050 that could be saved. That would be about 3% of all home healthcare in the US.
Global meat consumption is growing worldwide, by almost 3% a year since 1960.
Nobody liked what we did. Nobody liked the situation for our health, for the environment. But we all like it very much.
Growing that spur represent farmers, meat companies and butchers are customers of partners.
It don't come from farmers, so it's easy to change from chickens to farmers. If consumers want it, they have to change.
Affordable and accessible alternatives could yet see the rich world eat meat and cut down on itself.
If you look at mass trends, it's probably unlikely to consume that much meat. We found that without large-scale dietary changes, also plant-based diets, there would have a very slim chance of staying below 8% of climate change.
But even moving towards a plant-based diet could help.
According to our estimates, a predominantly plant-based diet could get us to probably 3/4 of the way. The government is campaigning by setting the right dietary guidelines. They can help procure policies where it's clear that standards that are ordered are plant-based and healthy and sustainable.
For a vegetarian butcher, plant-based meat is just the next step in the long history of development in the farming world.
It's always just looking at agriculture from up here to billions of farmers how they are fed with extinction because we don't need to do it. In the future, you will use machines to produce our meat, and you can slaughter animals. Wild chickens, wild pigs.
That's pretty much most of the facts I had. I actually had some questions for you all. I want to know, does anybody not think what anything was presented was correct? Since you all are more climate experts than I am, I'd say. Because I'm curious to hear some feedback. And if you've seen this before, have you known this, how inefficient animal product agricultural is? I mean, so in my mind, I think the only reason, like, in this last video, the vegetarian butcher said, you know, he needs to make the same products, just make them out of plants instead of animals, because I think the big barrier here, you know, we're an educational organization. We want to educate people. We feel like a lot of stuff that we talk about is not taught anywhere, really. And the big problem is just the status quo and habits. And that people, we're all raised in a way, you can look at it as brainwashing or not, because I think the way we were raised, it was, you look at it, you put, you know, it's not correct if you're trying to help the environment. But the problem is we're all conditioned to all these habits of certain foods that we want to eat. So one of the bigger changes that's happened recently, which is great, is that you do have all these alternatives that are plant-based and vegan products. They're not necessarily the healthiest for you, I'll tell you that, because we're really ultimately about human health, but they are a good transition, because as was said in today's videos, maybe you just need to start moving in the direction of plant-based, because any step you take is a huge win on so many different levels, especially for the environment. So now that you can find these faux meat products in just about any store, you probably know if you've been in the grocery store recently, you just look right next to the real stuff, and then there's the traditional product, and there's a new plant-based or vegan product. So that's what I think that for most people, that's probably the best way to go, and that's kind of what we try to do as an organization. We convey these concepts to people, and we try to give them options. Like our local vegan group talks about like these things locally, you know, like restaurants that have plant-based foods, stuff you can buy in the store. And the people will talk about climate, they'll talk about your health as well. Like I said, we're ultimately focused on human health, but the minute you go vegan, you're helping the climate. You can still do better than just vegan by some of the concepts I brought up earlier, such as organic farming. That will do way better for the environment than non-organic farming, for instance. So there's so many levels to it. I don't think you could ever say that you know it all, because I don't claim to know it all. I'm always learning. There's always something new to find out, and I'm just happy that everybody here is willing to consider these new ideas, especially since I think most of the people in this room said you're not vegan. So you have to be open-minded to consider that, and I'll open up here for any questions anyone wants to ask, and also if there aren't any questions, you can feel free to contact me through our Facebook group or our nonprofit with any questions you have or anything you want to do locally. And actually, before I ask any questions, please also mention that a lot of these concepts will be discussed at the Veg Fest on Sunday. We will have all different vendors that are all vegan. If you guys are not familiar with the Veg Fest, it is an all vegan event. So even if like a restaurant or another vendor has non-vegan products, they just don't bring them to our event that day, that's all. They can participate, and many of them are just like that, because there's very few 100% vegan vendors or restaurants out there. So anyway, that's just an opportunity for you. It's free all day long, and I'll be there.
What are the hours of it?
10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
And you mentioned the speakers.
Yeah, well, most of the speakers that are really big names are human health. We have Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who wrote the China study. He made the connection between cancer and animal products. There's Dr. Neil Barnard from PCRM, which is local organization, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. He's the head of that organization. He is also bringing Dr. Jim Loomis, I think he's going to be there, and Erica Gray, and one other person, I think, who's a nutritionist, also with PCRM. And then we will have Gene Bauer. And Gene Bauer runs Farm Sanctuary, which is more of an animal rights organization, but he gets into all these aspects too, especially and he does get into environmentalism as well. But I will also say that environmentalism is probably the least represented part of the three parts of veganism. There just aren't as many, there's not as much attention drawn to it, I don't think. I'm not sure why. I think that, if more attention was drawn to that, it would really just tremendously disrupt a large number of established industries, for sure. Which I think it already is. You can read the headlines that dairy sales are all way down. People started to slow down their meat. Although, don't make that think that we're all good now. Because the problem is everyone wants to be like Americans, and Americans have the reputation of eating tons of meat and dairy and all kinds of stuff, and that's what everyone else around the world wants to do. So even if we get a little better here, the rest of the world is going to still, just kind of like smoking. I think smoking transferred to other countries from here, it seems like, in recent years.
Did you see in Australia today there were riots, well, not a riot, there was a demonstration by vegans promoting veganism. And the Prime Minister came out and said he wanted to see them prosecuted because they were unpatriotic, their country was big on farming, and they just don't care about the country.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Denise, my wife, has heard that too. People that she knows, and people who are in traditional industry, like you say, that for generations they've farmed a certain way. We think that there's going to be new opportunities for those types of people, and different, like this person who's a vegetarian butcher, in a different type of farming, a newer type, the future way of doing it. So hopefully people aren't thinking that we try to be as friendly as possible when we're dealing with people, and we don't want people to think that we're upset with them. But I do think that there's more opportunities than ever on so many levels today, and you just have to be willing to consider them. And because of conditioning and habits, a lot of people aren't mentally there yet. That's why not everyone's vegan, in my opinion, anyway. But do you have questions?
Yeah, there's something in the first film I can understand. Maybe I heard it wrong, but they were saying something about the reasons why everybody can't go vegan or downsides of veganism, and they said something about
food deserts.
No, that it's an inefficient use of land.
Yeah. Oh, right. That was the thing. Yeah. See, I want to present both sides.
Natural grasslands it's more efficient to raise ruminants because they can handle.
on natural grasslands, yeah, I mean, this is where those animals would naturally be, like a wild horse, like you have wild buffalo or wild
buffalo.
But the truth is that you really can't have too many wild animals these days. They have to be in cordoned off areas, you know, and don't allow that to get you start thinking that we can put high level animal product production on those lands, because that's not what they're talking about yet.
Yeah.
They're talking about whatever the land would naturally support on its own, you know, and it had been for generations, but what the land did on its own is nowhere near the exponential ramp up that we've done that is not natural at all, and that's what's caused most of the environmental destruction.
I guess I'm confused because I can understand, you know, that wild animals can, you know, graze on.
Well,
So
buffalo.
they're talking about uncultivated land? Because if you cultivate
Right.
plants,
You could take away from its natural state. I mean, I just want to present that because that had some other opposing viewpoints in it that you're obviously picking up on. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with everything that was said in that video, but they do make a point, and that's a valid point, that land was used for animal grazing for generations, you know, if it's a natural pasture. But it was not, keep in mind, it was not used for animal agriculture. That's totally different than wild animals grazing on
I'm
open
just
natural
thinking
pasture.
about, you know, the loss of calories every step you go up the food chain.
Right.
So if you do cultivate plants, you don't have the 90% loss of energy when there's
Right.
herbivores.
Of course, they didn't say that, right? They're not saying it's efficient, because it's not. It's just, that's what the land lends itself to. Just as I was saying earlier, some people will also take that same line of thinking and say, well, look, we're using animal agriculture on lands you couldn't use anything else for. Like I was saying, floodplains, wetlands. You can't use it for anything else. But you can put some animals out there to roam around while you're raising them. I'm saying, I mean, it doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean you should do that.
But probably if you went sufficiently far away from meat production, you would need a much smaller total number of acres
Yes.
to raise food, and you could afford to have the floodplains just be
Right,
floodplains,
just restore them.
and the meadows just be meadows,
Yes.
and you wouldn't have a problem, and you wouldn't need to put cattle anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
A long time ago, I wrote a paper, or tried to write a paper, but where we calculate from a thermodynamic standpoint, what's the maximum carrying capacity of the plant.
Okay.
And to do that, I looked at a traditional, farm agriculture, not cattle.
What does that mean? Plants only?
Plants, yeah.
Plants only.
Like corn, okay? Just to give me in the ballpark.
All right.
Okay? And try to factor out the fertilizer that gets added to it. And after I did that paper, I got thinking, it's like, well, there are ecosystems where that would not be the most efficient way, or may not be the most efficient way to go. You can't get the same kind of corn production you can get in Iowa in
Florida.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking more Arizona,
Right.
you know. And,
So what's the natural uses of the land?
well, I mean, you look at what, if you look at, I think about it from the thermodynamic standpoint, the most efficient use of the land is probably the way the land was used originally.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because whatever was there originally, it probably thrived there because it was the most efficient way to convert from the sunlight, basically, to energy in production.
Right, I agree.
So if you think of it that way, you can see that there are areas where it probably isn't as efficient to grow vegetables, for instance, or like peas.
Right.
Peas, for instance, take a lot more water than.
You can't grow citrus.
Right. Right, so, but I mean, but if I also look at, if I look at the energy profile, the energy also has to consider the water
Yes.
as well, because water is basically evaporated from one place and carried into another place where it's deposited, so it's still the use of solar energy that goes into that evaporation process. Anyway, so that's where I was, one of the things, my next thing that I never did was to look at look at those natural grasslands to see what is the most efficient way to produce human food on that land in a sustainable way without the introduction of without pumping down aquifers and so forth, which is where we are today. We're massively pumping down the aquifers to get water to feed cattle that probably, and we're using what other grassland, what other areas we have to produce the high protein grains that we feed to cattle, rather than the grass fed, which is probably the ecosystem which they're adapted to and can most efficiently.
Yeah, and even though I think it was mentioned in one of these videos that even, or maybe it wasn't, but I know I've researched this a little myself too. Even if you do that method, it's not going to sustain huge amounts of people.
Oh no, yeah.
But there's some value in it. Like you said, if you leave things the way they were and you let that be, just like there's areas where people have wild horses, they're not used for food that I know of, but you know it's but so that's interesting. I feel like one other thing that you might want to consider too is that something that we're moving into, I believe, is indoor climate controlled plant farming.
Yes.
Because that can take place anywhere. And that can be local, and you can do it in an efficient way. You can also do it in an organic way as well. So I think that's probably the future
When
of
you say
farming.
organic, you mean with no pesticides, or is it something else?
Well,
that's
yes,
unique?
I would say organic, my definition means no chemical fertilizers, no chemical weed controls, no chemical bug controls. You know, so you have to use compost for your fertilizer, and you have to use other methods to control the weeds and bugs. Even, I think the newest way that they're going to use this for weeds, for instance, robots. You have robots run around and pull all the weeds. You don't need to do anything different. The robots will do all the work for you, you know? I mean, it's a great piece of technology. But then there's a step above that too. So you all know, like what we're talking about through our nonprofit, we actually are advocating a veganic whole plant lifestyle. Veganic is above organic. Veganic means that you don't use any animal products in the growing of the plants. So you don't use any animal manure. Like I said, like some of the things that we'll say, well, we use all this stuff from these animals. We spray the manure all over the fields and fertilizer. Well, that's horrible for the environment, okay? So,
well, it is and it isn't. I mean,
well, assuming you have no runoff in a perfect world, but assuming it doesn't make you smell or cause any other problems, which it does. Okay, and so
well, it's the concentration that causes the problem. Which, you know, it just like so many other things, environmental issues. It's not the emissions of carbon dioxide that's the problem. It's the emissions of carbon dioxide by burning coal, which is a sequester of coal of carbon.
Right.
I mean, I remember going to a talk about climate change and by a skeptic, and he was saying that, oh, but humans emit all kinds of carbon dioxide. Well, yeah, but then that carbon dioxide that humans are emitting was eaten in the terms of in the form of food the day before or hours before. So it doesn't it's to the environment, because what gets emitted was taken in from the environment.
I heard say like in the case of animal products and using their manure to fertilize fields, there's going to be runoff. You know, it's going to get straight into the water supply untreated, which we can never get away with that in our cities. But for some reason, the animal agriculture industry is okay with that. There's no regulations but there are some, but they're very loosely enforced. And as you all know, when hurricanes come through in the lowlands of North Carolina, which is where all these hog farms are, that stuff just runs. Literally, all the water is literally shit when that happens. You know, and there's no way to stop it. Even though they say they have something to stop it, some regulation, you can't stop it when something like that happens. You just
happens with the king tide as well.
What's that?
It happens with the king tide as well. There was a study I just read last week about how when they had the really big high tide, they call it the king tide.
Right.
They measured the water there and they found it was full of crap. It was really, really bad. In fact, the EPA has an environmental standard of how much the maximum amount of nutrients that can be in the water that gets washed out to the ocean. And what they found was when they measured the nutrients after the king tide, they measured the nutrients in the water, and it was a full 1 year's worth of nutrients in that one event.
Right. Yeah, well, so going back to veganic, we would not use animal products in the growing of the crops or plants, depending on how you do it. But we wouldn't need to if people started switching away from animal agriculture. You wouldn't have them when they were produced. So you need to find other methods anyway.
So how'd you do nitrogen fixation?
You just have to use organic compost.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're rotating with bees.
Yeah, you have to use different farming methods than they use today. So I mean, you know how it is right now. Right now, the system is not helping with organics because organic food costs like twice as much a lot of times, and the chemicals are so cheap. And even though they're destroying the environment, there's a cost there that's not being absorbed, which eventually will be. And I think that organic is going to be the way of the future. Veganic will probably be the way of the future. Animal agriculture will finally work its way out because we'll know too much to allow it to continue. I think is what will end up happening. That's just my opinion.
Mike, can you tell me your last name again? I didn't catch
Young,
it.
Y-O-U-N-G.
And do you have an email address?
Yeah, you can use aPlantBasedDiet.org at gmail.com.
Okay.
Did you sign the book, John?
I'm sorry?
Did you say they have,
Oh, I did. So I'll probably get some.
They got you, man.
I think there's an argument somewhere in there, though I can't seem to find it yet, of the importance of wildlife in the relationship with agriculture. I mean, the fact that wildlife in all its stages, from the wolves to the insects, are what stabilize our ecosystem, our biomass.
Yes, and the fences mess it all up.
Yeah, so, like instead of cattle roaming the border of Yellowstone, let the wolves kind of roam a little bit further out. I mean, isn't there some kind of balance that we can strike? Isn't there a balance in wildlife that's
I
more
think so.
important than just?
And that can happen if you're not using an inefficient method of growing or producing food, which is what animal agriculture is. There'll be so many more options. Like you said, in one of these video clips, somebody said we'll free up land mass the size of the continent of Africa if we switched away. So we have plenty of options at that point in time. We still have options.
The other thing is that
Just a comment. I was in California last year and I was driving up I-5, what they call it, and I was just shocked at how many cattle were out there. And then also almond trees. I mean, I was just driving along. It was just amazing to me that we're doing that. I was just shocked. And I've known that the almonds use so much water and that the cattle use so much water. So is anything being done in California about that, or is that just one of those arguments?
California, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like we were saying. If these whether it's animals or plants are not native to a certain area, it's going to cause other issues.
I mean, that's a desert.
Yeah.
So they're pumping all the water from everywhere else into that space.
It's pumping
So-
out of the aquifer.
So my question is the beefless Impossible Whopper real?
I know.
Because you know what? They put it out on
we
April Fool's Day. Of all days to put something out like that, they put it out on April Fool's
Well,
Day.
it's only being tested, I think, in St. Louis or something like that. So
Right,
you
so
can't go
it's,
out here and get one. But they'll eventually. I think it's gotten so much attention.
Wow.
It's the money, right? I mean, if people are willing to spend money on it, then people will produce these products. And as I said, that is a great example of what you can do to mimic something that someone's used to with animal products, but it's not healthy for the human body. Don't think that. I mean,
Neither is the animal.
neither is the animal. That's right. You're right. So
It's healthier.
So, like from our perspective, there is a win for the environment. There's a win for the animals, but it is not a win for the other part of it.
For the health.
Yeah, for your health of your own person. Yeah.
Well, but it's healthier to eat the Impossible Burger than to eat a real burger.
Not necessarily.
necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Why?
There's a whole class of, when they talk about vegan diets, and they did mention here, they say, well, the average vegan is this much healthier, and it's true. But there's also a class of food called vegan junk food, and that fits squarely into that category. And you can be a junk food vegan and have nothing but vegan junk food, and you will not be healthy at all.
French fries are vegan.
Yeah, and now they made out of.
Well, I'm sure, I'm sure it's not organic, so yeah, probably chemicals.
But there's so many downsides to meat from the pesticides and steroids and everything else that goes into the meat. There's
Right,
so
you're not
many,
getting that.
and then the natural cholesterols that you find in meat that you don't find
Correct,
in
you're not getting that.
vegetables.
But if it was designed by a food chemist in a lab and then produced and you're eating it, what do you think else is in there? That's not.
I think the Impossible Burger, for instance, is they actually make meat in a petri dish.
It's pea protein is
Well,
what it
okay.
is. It's high
That's not
protein.
lab grown
Is it
meat.
what-
Actually, lab grown meat is another class
Okay.
of food.
All right.
The Impossible Burger is not lab grown meat, but
Okay,
it's
good.
probably produced by food chemists with different chemicals and, I mean, to make it so authentic and realistic. You can't just do that with whole plants.
They're trying to make it
It looks like a real burger to me.
Yeah, and it is. It tastes like one too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's nothing you want to make part of a staple of your diet. Is what I'm saying. If you care about your health.
Impossible Burger is made with wheat protein and coconut oil. Coconut oil actually has saturated
It has
fat.
wheat protein?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Wheat protein.
Oh, wheat, okay.
Yeah, so you won't get cholesterol, but saturated fat isn't good for you either.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's the Achilles heel of being vegan is oil. Oil is in almost every, and you don't want any oil. The best amount of oil is none. If you,
Why can't oil be vegan?
it is vegan, but I'm saying it is very,
It's just
very
not healthy.
detrimental to your
Oh, I
health.
see, it's not, okay.
Yeah, so like if you, like people say olive oil is good, or this oil is good, it's good, but the olives are what's good, not the oil form. You want to avoid as much processing as possible, so if you want to get the benefits of olive oil, just eat olives.
That's
And
why,
same goes for any other type of
that's
oil.
why people talk about a whole food plant-based
Right,
diet.
right.
You wanna eat the whole food, you don't wanna squeeze the oil out of it and drink the oil.
Yeah, same is true with juice, because that's a highly processed form of a fruit
And you
or
lose
vegetable.
the fiber, which is.
Right, right. Most of the good stuff is gone when you go to extremes and in terms of processing. So, I mean, it still looks good, but most of the good stuff is not there. There's a lot to learn, because there's all kinds of stuff. But it's still better for the climate, that's the thing. So, but the thing where it may not be better for the climate, like I say, if you take on an all junk food vegan diet, full of processed chemical-laden foods, well, maybe someone can make an argument saying that's not necessarily better for the environment, and they might be right.
Like the Impossible Burger, you had to have all kinds of chemicals to get the flavor you wanted. And what's involved with making those chemicals, if you look at the life cycle process. It may be that if you look at the life cycle process, the making of all those chemicals actually amounts to more greenhouse gas emissions than the methane from cows.
Yes, that's the thing. We're talking in general terms. I showed you the slides, the
Yeah.
charts, but that's very general terms. It's not talking about all these specifics. So I'm just bringing it up so you know how detailed this can be and how much there is to learn, really. I mean, it's,
On one of the videos that we saw, the gentleman from the Netherlands that was making, what was his product made from?
it seemed like it was mostly plants. I'm not familiar with it.
He mentioned it was from peas.
Soy,
Yeah,
peas.
it could be. I mean, it could be from mainly peas. It could be peas and something else. I don't know. You have to
He
really
mentioned
look
several
at
things, he
ingredients.
said soy
And
and peas,
lupine.
and a lupine.
Yeah, I don't know what, I mean, I didn't see the ingredient list, so I don't know. I would never make any assumptions that just because something says plant-based on it or something, that it's healthy. I'm saying that's a big assumption. You've got to really drill down into those ingredients and find out what's in the food, especially if it's processed in any way. And like I said, oil is the biggest one. If you get rid of oil, but you won't be able to have any Impossible Burgers or anything else, right? Because they're all full of oil. So you'll automatically be healthy. You get rid of the animal products and the oil. And actually, that's another thing. If you look at the bottom of our banner, the certified logo, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, and hopefully we'll have more of this locally soon. We're trying to identify the healthier plant-based foods. And that's what that's for. Because for instance, right now, we will not give that certification to any food that's plant-based or vegan. It has to be automatically plant-based or vegan. If it has any added oil, oil is an added ingredient, it does not obtain our certification. Because we know that that is not at all healthy. So, but again, I don't want to scare anybody, but I want to tell you that there's so much to learn, and that everything we talk about is very general. Veganism is definitely the way to go. And what level you end up at, that's up to you. You know, but it does make a difference in terms of the climate too. That's why I'm trying to tell you more detail, because if you're eating whole plant foods that are organically grown, that is probably the best for the environment of anything you could possibly do. But the Impossible Burger is a good step in the right direction. You know, I don't want to get anybody wrong about that. It's definitely a positive step. So, anybody else have any more questions?
I'm hungry. No.
There are vegan snacks.